ahead of them. Nevertheless, the reverberations are there, and I can tell you, having just come back from Lebanon, that people are very worried that by one means or another, this wave of uprisings is going to continue to affect other places. Why were we surprised? We political scientists who think we know what's going on in the region, we're actually pretty much as surprised as everybody else when all of these uprisings happened. We had gotten used to the durability and the longevity of these dictatorships, and we spent a great deal of our time trying to figure out not whether they might change, but why they were so successful. And so there were many theories, several of which I will describe here, of what we call persistent authoritarianism. One was the theory of the rentier state, which simply means that those countries that had vast amounts of income coming in from outside, not being income produced by local labor, income that went directly into the coffers of the ruling elite, allowed them basically to buy consent. And it was thought, according to this theory, that there was essentially a tacit bargain between the ruling monarchs of that region and the people, to the effect that we will provide you with a pretty good life because we've got all these resources, welfare, education, all sorts of things, in return for your obedience and compliance. I think we just lost, how did that happen? We lost the, I've got it here in front of me, but I don't quite see it up there. Did I push a button wrongly here? Voila, there it comes. You like the cartoon? I don't want to editorialize, but that's the way some Arab intellectuals look at the people that are buying legitimacy with oil money. Another theory was that these authoritarian regimes simply survive by being nasty, by being fierce, by scaring the hell out of people. And indeed, the Arab world, the governments of the Arab world are among the very highest ranked in terms of expenditures on military and security functions. And so in all of these countries, the mukhabarat, the secret police, and in one form or another, tend to make it very clear to ordinary people that if you criticize the king or the president, or if you criticize, let alone ridicule, which does happen, their policies, you will get in deep trouble. One of the reasons that the fierce state, as the Egyptian political scientist Nazih Ayubi coined it, seems to have suddenly fallen prey to popular uprising despite all of this, is that social media have allowed people to talk among themselves and express skepticism or even sarcasm and ridicule over the claims that the monarchs may make for being legitimate, being pious, being kind and generous and so forth, and not being corrupt. People are now able to talk among themselves, despite the existence of the mukhabarats, and say, oh yeah, but we don't believe that. That's not really true. So there is why one theory has to be reconsidered. And there was the question, which is something we often hear in the Arab world, that the reason for this persistent authoritarianism is that foreign powers prefer it that way. And that applies especially to the United States. And it has been pointed out, particularly by the young and the educated students and intellectuals, professional people across the region, that, well, the deep state, that beneath all the trappings of fake elections and manufactured plebiscites and propaganda and so forth, the deep state prevails. And this is an interesting proposition that has gained some credence, I think, lately, given the events in Egypt, in which after a very brief period, a democratically elected Muslim Brotherhood-dominated government was overthrown by the military, who represented, as it were, the deep state. And as Gamal Abdel Nasser, the leader back in the 50s and 60s that I referred to, said when questioned about the idea of democracy, he said, well, yeah, we were supposed to have that, but it was corrupt. And in fact, while in the period before the Egyptian Revolution, there was a form of democracy, he, I think quite rightly pointed out that the landowners and the pashas used this kind of democracy as an easy tool for the benefits of a feudal system. And that's why he overthrew that particular, that monarchy and that sort of false democracy. All right, so theories of persistent authoritarianism have blinded us to the astonishing events that have occurred within the last 3 years. So I think what we need to do is to go back to the drawing board, we scholars, and ask what was going on outside the authoritarian structure. So instead of devoting so much time to the mechanisms of authoritarian upgrading, we need to spend more time, and we should have spent more time, looking at what's going on down there in society. Not to say that it wasn't studied, it was studied mostly not by political scientists, more by anthropologists. But we didn't really know, and we didn't expect what happened. And what do we see when we look at civil society? Well, look at categories. Let's start, first of all, with the traditional elites. These are old-timers that have been around, and I've put up a picture here of Amr Moussa, the longtime foreign minister of Egypt under the Mubarak regime, and he's now managed to distance himself from that somewhat tarnished relationship of the past and become a part of a sort of respectable post-Mubarak civil society, and he's a player in the ongoing game of Egyptian politics. So traditional elites are there and have to be paid attention to. But I think more attention has to be paid to the newly vibrant elements of the civil society that we had not paid much attention to. Workers, for example. And in Egypt, the April 6th movement, which began way back in 2008 to support striking industrial workers, played a very important role in the uprising against Mubarak. We observed these things. My colleagues who study Egypt were counting hundreds and hundreds of strikes and demonstrations in Egyptian factories going back well before 2011, but somehow we didn't sort of connect the dots. We didn't really understand that this might lead to something big. And then there was the question of youth. You're all familiar, of course, with the very young population profile of Egypt and the other countries of the Arab world. There's a huge population bulge of the young people, under 30, under 25. And it turned out that these folks were the shock troops of these massive demonstrations and uprisings that arose in all of these countries. And in Egypt, there was a young man named Khaled Said who was beaten to death by Egyptian police in June of 2010, about 6 months before the uprisings really got underway. And it led to a following under the slogan of "We are all Khaled Said." And this movement was in Egypt, they were there in Tunisia, they were there in Yemen. I was recently in Beirut a few months ago, actually, interviewing Yemeni women activists, and that's a surprise. So we have to look more at these. Finally, let me compare and contrast the legitimacy formulas old and new. And I'll talk first to recapitulate, actually, some of the things that I have said about the old legitimacy formulas. And keep in mind those Weberian categories that I mentioned at the beginning. Well, what did they involve? Here, of course, is when Nasser made the cover of Time magazine back when, 1966? I can't quite make that out. What were the elements of the old legitimacy formulas? Well, there was the military bureaucratic state. That was kind of the institutional, the sort of corrupted institutional legitimacy that was prevalent. There was the question of Islamism, although that was a legitimacy symbol that had yet to really flower and become dominant as it has lately in some of these uprisings. There was the idea of procedural democracy, a kind of a nod to democratic procedures, but without any significant meaning. And then going back to the notion of traditional authority, this idea, especially in the monarchies, of patrimonialism, that I am the father of the state and you are my children. And this is language actually that is used particularly by the kings in Morocco, Jordan, Saudi Arabia. And it carries a certain weight, but as you can infer, I think, from the comments I've already made, a lot of young people are not ready to we're going to have land reform, we're going to nationalize properties, we're going to make life better for the ordinary people. That was very important. But as I've tried to indicate, those legitimacy formulas have become frayed and worn out. As we look at the state of the uprising countries today, however, I do not see new legitimacy formulas taking root. And all I can suggest at this point is that somehow the emerging leaders, if we can ever get them to emerge and get their act together, these oppositions that have so far been rather ineffective in taking advantage of overthrowing the dictators, they need somehow to do a better job of creating ideas and programs, legitimacy formulas that will appeal to a more vibrant and activist civil society. And what would such new legitimacy formulas involve? Well, I've indicated a few here. Inclusiveness is extremely important, and the traditionally marginalized sectors, particularly the poorer ones, labor and agriculture, need to be brought in. The power and influence of elites needs to be limited. And something that is still relatively in short supply is enlightened leadership. The idea of new opposition leaders coming close to exuding the personal legitimacy or even the charisma of a Nasser or an Ataturk or an Ibn Saud, we don't see it. A lot of the protest was over good governance and a reaction against widespread corruption. And there's no doubt, almost without exception, the level of corruption in the incumbent regimes has been all too high. At the same time, and here's something that is needed but sadly lacking so far, is the creation of new civic identities. This can happen, and I think it should happen if the newly energized elites, particularly the young people, are able, that is not hostile to pluralistic membership. And as for freedom, it's pretty clear that they would like more of it. And finally, as I indicated earlier, although the question of Palestine